In today's video, I want to give you guys 3 reasons why the Miami Dolphins are unfortunately stuck in no man's land. Subscribe and like the video if you do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. And we are going to begin with my first reason as to why the Dolphins are stuck in no man's land, and that is the fact that I thought they had a middle of the road offseason. So in this section, I want to talk about what they did in free agency and then talk about what they did in the draft. And for context, in terms of what a middle of the road offseason is, it is a situation where you are a team that does not have a direction. You're not clearly tearing down your roster and starting a rebuild, or you're not in the process of rebuilding, or you're one of those teams that's trying to build up to become a contender. I felt like this offseason for the Miami Dolphins, there were so many losses and some new additions that overall, I don't think this team really picked a direction. They're not rebuilding, but they're also not contending for titles. So hence why it's termed as a middle-of-the-road offseason. In free agency, they brought in guys like James Daniels on a 3-year deal, Zach Wilson, Tyrell Dodson, I'm not going to pronounce this, but a safety, Nick Westbrook-Akine, Ashton Davis, Willie Gay, and a handful of other depth options. They also re-signed a couple of depth options and some other pieces as well. We should also talk about the Jalen Ramsey trade too. We'll get to that here in just a moment. In terms of the actual additions in free agency, James Daniels is an interesting prospect. He tore his Achilles last year for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It is a cheaper contract, only at about $8 million annually, and I would probably be sure there's probably some contingencies within the contract, so that way Miami can get out of it if he's not able to return to form. However, if he is able to return to form, he's had some decent years for Pittsburgh. He's gotten better as time has gone on. Hopefully, he just can come back from that Achilles injury 100%, because if so, I do think he's quite a nice upgrade in the interior. Zach Wilson, backup quarterback, maybe there's some potential there. I actually do like his fit within the system. Tyrell Dodson is a solid linebacker that can be solid in coverage, but at times has some flaws to his game. This is last year via PFF at 47.0 run defense grade with an 82.9 coverage grade. But I also want to give him his flowers in 2023 on a much smaller sample size, but still on 550 snaps. He had an 89.5 overall grade with a 73.7 pass rush grade, 82.6 run defense grade, and an 86.8 coverage grade. I'm not expecting him to return to those numbers, but if he can get closer to that range and just really kind of pick up his run defense, I'd feel pretty good about this addition. It's another really cheap contract at just a little bit over $4 million annually. You pair him up with Jordan Brooks, who's a really good run defender. I actually really like this addition for the team. They brought in a couple safeties, including Ashton Davis and Afitu Melifonwu. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. I think those are quality guys, quality depth pieces, but I really wouldn't feel confident having to start those guys for an entire season. Ashton Davis last year played for the Jets. He's 28 years of age, and I think last year was one of his really only big years of actual playing time, but he did have a 73.4 run defense grade with a 67.8 coverage grade, albeit on only just 250 snaps. Maybe you bank on his upside, but I do have some concerns about a 28-year-old that's never really been a full-time starter, especially recently. Again, this is a team, though, that did lose Javon Holland, so they kind of were pretty desperate to find a new safety duo back there, and I guess for now, Ashton Davis will have to get the job done. Outside of that, Nick Westbrook-Akine could be a quality third option. He was kind of a touchdown machine last year, and you have a couple other pieces that might end up playing roles. Let's talk about the trade, the Jalen Ramsey trade. Essentially what happened, the Pittsburgh Steelers get Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey, 2 guys that were wanting new contracts from Miami, and in return, the Miami Dolphins bring back their former first-round pick in Minkah Fitzpatrick. So for this trade, I'm going to look at it from 2 perspectives, my optimistic side of things and then my more pessimistic side of things. My optimistic side is that you got a quality player in Minkah Fitzpatrick that last year a 74.3 run defense grade with a 67.9 coverage grade. The year prior in 2023, similar grades. 2022, one of his better years with 80s in both. And for the most part, the past couple years, he's been one of the more consistent safeties out there. Again, this is a Miami team that lost out on Javon Holland and has some big-time question marks with the safety room. By adding a Minkah Fitzpatrick, that's obviously a significant upgrade, arguably even more so than even keeping like a Javon Holland. So bringing Minkah Fitzpatrick in is obviously a nice addition to the secondary, but that's kind of the end of my optimistic side. I'm happy that Minkah Fitzpatrick is a Dolphin because he's a quality player, but outside of that, I don't really see the high upside of this pickup. For starters, your hand was kind of forced with Jalen Ramsey. Ramsey wanted out. It also sounded like Miami wanted him out as well. The contract just didn't work out there. Ramsey is not the 2020, 2019 version of himself. He's not that former guy. He's still a damn good corner, but he's clearly not that guy anymore. So getting off of his contract isn't the worst thing in the world, but having to package up a top tier corner in a room where Miami was very weak in, pair that up with a tight end in Jonnu Smith, who had a breakout year last year and frankly was a big part of that Dolphins offense, and now you get rid of him. Granted, I'm not like mad about that because could have been a one-year wonder, maybe, I'm not too sure. Still, you package up two guys that are quality starters for you for one starter, and I think you just created two gaping holes on your team. Now, as of when I'm making the video, they did just somehow make a trade for Darren Waller, and I gotta be honest with you, I am not a fan of this move whatsoever. And it isn't the fact that I think Darren Waller is a terrible player, it's the fact that, well, he didn't play at all last year, and there have been various interviews that he's done and various things that he's posted online about how he's enjoying retirement and how he just kind of fell out of love with football. Here's a clip of him talking about some stuff with the New York Giants that made him want to retire.
When did that thought process of retirement start kicking in for you?
I remember when it started. I definitively remember where it started. We played Buffalo. We're in the course of the game. We're having a lot of success with this Y counter lead play. So I'm like damn near playing fullback, hitting on counter and going up and hitting the linebacker, and Saquon hitting the Jets. And I'm like, this is not what I want to be doing, but it's helping the team. But I'm like, bro, like I'm in here doing Y counter lead now. Like I'm on the sideline, like looking up at.
Obviously, in that clip, you can take certain context from that. But me personally, if I'm a Dolphins team that's trying to build a culture, I don't really want a guy who doesn't want to do some of the harder things like being a fullback in a specific game. Again, I'm not really blaming Darren Waller because, frankly, I wouldn't want to be a lead fullback blocker either, especially if I was a bit more of a finesse tight end like Waller. But at the same time, you have to have that I want to do it all mentality if you want to be a successful team. And by bringing him in, I don't think you're getting that guy. Now, is Waller an upgrade over Jonnu Smith? I'm not sure. Maybe. We'll have to wait and see what Waller looks like. I don't think he'll be because Smith was pretty good last year, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. I don't think it's a significant downgrade by any stretch because Waller is a good tight end, at least when he was healthy, especially with the Raiders, but that was several years ago at this point, so I don't really know what to expect from Waller. I will say I don't hate his fit within this team, especially if they don't really use him much as a blocker, but instead as more of a true pass-catching tight end. All in all, with this trade, I'm not a big fan of it. I think the Dolphins kind of just, again, like I've been mentioning, a middle-of-the-road move here. You lost two starters, you bring new two starters in, but I don't really think they're significant upgrades. If anything, I'd probably venture to say there might be slight downgrades, especially because outside corner is just such a more premium position than a free safety or a strong safety, depending on where Minka plays. But with that said, let's go ahead and move on to the 2025 NFL Draft. Now, in this draft, I'm really only going to focus in on their first two picks because they only had two picks in the first 4 rounds. So in round 1, they took Kenneth Grant, awesome pickup. We'll talk about that here in a moment. Round 2, Jonah Savaiania. Round 5, Jordan Phillips, Jason Marshall, Dante Trader. Round 6, Ollie Gordon. Round 7, my guy Quinn Ewers, and then Zeke Biggers. I'm going to focus in primarily on Kenneth Grant and Jonah Savaiania. I'm just going to kind of mesh these guys into two because I feel like they're very similar players in a lot of ways, except obvious different positions. Kenneth Grant's a big athletic tackle that can do a lot of things, and I think he could potentially be your Christian Wilkins replacement that you didn't have last year. He can stuff the run, he can get to the quarterback, and you're just adding another foundational piece to a defensive line that I thought was already pretty good. So I like the pickup. It was a solid pickup in my opinion. Round 2, Jonah Savaiania. I mean, he has flexibility to play both guard and tackle. He's strong. He could be a mauler. This is an offensive line from Miami that frankly needed a lot of help, and I think by adding a Jonah, you're giving yourself a young guy who potentially could be a big role player on this roster. I will admit, I don't really love his fit in the Mike McDaniel system, but I think he can definitely adjust to it. I'm not too worried about that. The only other picks I really want to talk about in this draft class is Ollie Gordon and Quinn Ewers, because for the most part, the other guys, I would at least hope, won't be getting significant playing time. I would hope that they are role players or special teams guys, and hopefully for the Dolphins, one of these guys steps up. But in terms of Ollie Gordon, obviously 2023, he was just magnificent. Like, he was one of the best, if not the best running back in the country. Helped Oklahoma State make it all the way to a Big 12 title game. Of course, they lost. Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year, first team All Big 12, 1,700 rushing yards, and just was absolutely dominant all across the field. And then 2024 happened, and he looked like a complete shell of himself. He looked slower. He didn't look healthy. The offense was bad around him. And his draft stock went from a potential first-round pick all the way down to a 6th-round pick. I will say, I actually do like his fit with this this Miami Dolphins team. There's not a lot of pressure on him to be the go-to guy. He gets to sit behind a guy like Devon Achane, and so he can kind of be a bit more of that physical, bruiser style back, whereas those two guys can be a bit more of your speed options. I'm not expecting much playing time from him, but if he can have an impressive preseason, maybe he'll get a couple reps in the regular season. And then for Quinn Ewers, again, you can see my Texas flag. You can see my Texas pop over there. So, of course, you guys know me. I'm a pretty big fan of Texas, and I really did like Quinn Ewers. Obviously, former #1 overall prospect back in 2020, or I think it was 2021, one of those 2 years. And I thought every year that he was at Texas, he got better. I do think he has fundamental flaws to his game. He's bad under pressure. He doesn't really read the pocket very well. Deep balls is just not his specialty, but what I will say is I think he has a very live arm. I also think that he's really solid in the intermediate and underneath game. I do see his game translating very well to the system because I think he can play with anticipation and he does have the arm talent to make any throw on the field. It just kind of comes down to the fact that I think he needs probably 2-3 years of genuine development, and I think it'd be pretty cool if he can sit under Mike McDaniel for 2 to 3 years. My one concern is that McDaniel is probably on the chopping block after this year if he doesn't have a successful season. So hopefully Quinn can get the right coaching around him because I think he actually has talent to maybe end up being a solid backup to, I don't know, a low-tier quarterback one on certain rosters. Again, he's a 7th round pick. I'm not expecting that. Hopefully he could just be a backup. All in all, I actually kind of liked their draft. I thought it did a nice job of addressing certain positions, but they only had 2 players that are probably going to be impactful guys. The rest of them are 5th round picks and 6th and 7th round guys. So none of those guys should at least be starters on this team. It is a shame that they just don't have the draft capital nor the assets to actually make any significant moves. Again, as I mentioned, to me, this was just a middle of the road offseason. They did not pick a direction. They're not rebuilding. They're not retooling. This is a team that was average last year, and I expect them to be about the same this year. They did not trade a Tyreek Hill, nor a Tua Tagovailoa. Yes, you traded Ramsey, but you didn't trade Ramsey for assets and future guys. You picked up Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's a 28-year-old safety, and you also just traded for Darren Waller, who I don't know his age, but it's probably like a 30-year-old tight end. I love their draft class with Jonas Savaiinea and Kenneth Grant and, some of the other guys later in the rounds, but I just think it wasn't enough for me to really flip my opinion on Miami, which then gets me to overall my second opinion as to why the Miami Dolphins are stuck in no man's land, and this is the fact that I think they have an average roster with massive flaws. Now, as I did the last portion, I do want to talk about some positives with this roster. Obviously, on the offensive end, Tyreek Hill, when healthy, is an awesome receiver. Having him paired up with Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, that is one of the most dynamic receiving cores and just in general weapon core in the NFL. If Waller can kind of return back to form and if he's not lost a step, I actually think that could be a really nice weapons core for Tua Tagovailoa to work with. I also think they have at least a quality quarterback. I don't think Tua's a shitty quarterback by no stretch, so at the bare minimum, they will win some games. I do think this offensive line has the potential to be better than what it was last year. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say this offensive line is going to be good, but I do expect Austin Jackson to be fine at right tackle. I'm also very optimistic about Jonas Savaiinea. Aaron Brewer had a decent year last year. If James Daniels can come back from that torn Achilles, that could be a solid pickup. And then Patrick Paul, hey buddy, it's your time to shine. I am worried about this offensive line because I think there is a very strong chance this line just sucks next year, but I could also see a path where it's not terrible next year. The pathway for this offensive line to be good is, of course, Patrick Paul works out at tackle, Jonah can play well, and of course James Daniels comes back from that torn Achilles looking like the guy he was prior to the injury. But on the contrary, Patrick Paul very well could have a bad start to his career. James Daniels does not look the same, and Jonas Savaiinea is just not ready to start, and all of a sudden you have 3 starting offensive linemen that you probably don't want out there. And you have a quarterback in Tua that's very injury prone, and I would really worry about his health behind this offensive line if things don't go their way. If things do go their way, though, I actually think this offense could be pretty good next year. Offensively speaking, this was a team that was very different because of injuries, especially to Tua Tagovailoa, but they still ranked 22nd in points per game, 18th in yards per game, and I think for the most part, around middle of the pack in most statistics. If you get a fully healthy season from your offense, I expect this team to be back into top 15 conversations, which I think is good for this team. But then we go over to the defense. And I actually really like some things about this defense, primarily their front 7. Of course, we have to assume the health of Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb are able just to get out there and play because those guys did not play much last year, if all actually. But when healthy, Phillips can get after the quarterback. Bradley Chubb has shown the ability to do so as well. I think he had 11 sacks in 2023. You also have Kenneth Grant up the middle, Zach Sealer. Chop Robinson's probably going to take another step too. I also like Tyrell Dodson and Jordan Brooks, and sort of their contrary playing styles of one being really good against the run and one being very good against the pass. I think this will be a team that can get after the quarterback, and I also think this will be a team that can stuff the run. But here is the big concern. Their cornerback group is terrible, guys. It sucks. Again, sticking to the positives here, Minkah Fitzpatrick at free safety is a great player, but outside of him, I have a lot of questions about this unit. Storm Duck as an outside corner, I'm not too sure about him. This is last year via PFF, a 54.8 coverage grade on only 359 snaps. Alongside him, you have Jason Marshall Jr., who was your 5th round pick. I'm going to assume Cam Smith might be the other starter, or maybe another move is down the road. Also, Kader Kaho, maybe he moves to outside corner. Kader's a good player, a 68.9 coverage grade, but 42 receptions allowed on just 700 snaps. Not ideal, but I think you've seen enough. This is 2023 to feel pretty confident that at least you have one cornerback down. Again, I kind of assume that you're going to probably have to play him an outside corner and then move like an Artie Burns to play that nickel role. I don't know how they're going to work this secondary out, but there's like legitimately 4 jobs up for grabs right now. Minkah Fitzpatrick, Kader Kaho. I'm also going to assume Storm Duck will all be your starters next year. But who do you have around those guys? I mean, of course, you do have a Fidu. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Maybe he can play a different role. You do have Ashton Davis. Maybe he can move somewhere there too. I don't really feel great about those guys, but I guess I'll make it work. But outside of them, man, I'm really worried about this secondary. Like, I'm talking about a team that I feel really good about the front 7. Like, I think they'll be able to stuff the run. I think they'll be able to get to the quarterback. But if you don't have corners that can hold up for more than 2 seconds, I mean, they're just going to get picked apart out there. So I really worry about this defense primarily within the secondary and just finding ways to stop the quarterback. They don't have that cornerback 1 nor cornerback 2. Like, I think they just have a really good, nickel and Kader and a really good safety in Minkah, but I don't feel great about anybody else. They're relying on guys who just simply are not talented enough to make it as top tier corners in the NFL. And you're going to have to rely on those guys for probably the entire season unless they make a trade. In general, I think this roster is maybe slightly worse, maybe slightly better than what it was last year. I think there's a lot of question marks with this team. Obviously, you're hoping for health to go their way because if they can stay healthy, I think they will be a better team than what they were last year. But I look at the tight end room, I'm not feeling great about it because you're bringing Darren Waller in right now. You also have an offensive line that has a lot of question marks. Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, can they stay healthy? And you look at the secondary, it's not very good. Let's go ahead and now hop into my third reason as to why I think the Miami Dolphins are stuck in no man's land, and that is just Tua Tagovailoa and his limitations. Now, before I get into this section, I do want to make one thing very clear about myself and this channel. I like to keep things very positive, and I really do not like making, quote-unquote hit pieces or, negative videos on certain teams. So if you are somebody who's a little bit frustrated by this, I do apologize. I just have to speak my truth. I cannot lie to you guys. And when it comes to Tua, as I mentioned earlier, I do think he's a quality starting quarterback. With that said, I think you need a top 15 quarterback to win the Super Bowl. And I think at times Tua plays like a top 15 quarterback, but when it matters most against competent teams in very specific conditions, Tua can look really, really bad. He's not a mobile quarterback. He's somebody who has to play with a lot of anticipation. He doesn't have the greatest arm talent or arm strength. I do think he's a smart quarterback, but he's not somebody who's going to make a lot of playmaking stuff out there. He's going to fit within the system and get the job done. And against bad teams, that's totally fine. But as I mentioned, when you start going up against the likes of the Bills, the Chiefs, or the Ravens, or at this stage, some of the other teams in the AFC, you have to be able to make plays outside of the system. You have to be able to, well, of course, stay healthy. You have to be able to do other things than just play with this super anticipation that at times Tua can play with. It also doesn't help when you look at Tua Tagovailoa's contract, where he's currently making $53 million annually, which is just $2 million less than Joe Burrow and Josh Allen. And I'm sorry, Tua is just simply not in the same category as a Joe Burrow or a Josh Allen. Again, I think Tua is a quality quarterback that can get the job done. He's only 27 years old, so you have this guy for the foreseeable future. But I do think with Tua, unless you can put a great roster around him, you're going to be severely handicapped. He reminds me in some ways, and don't take this too comparison but of a Jimmy Garoppolo in a way, where Jimmy Garoppolo was a fine quarterback with a super OP roster around him, but when you put him in a situation where the team around him wasn't as good, all of a sudden Jimmy G was terrible. Now, that's an extreme example. I think Tua is a much better quarterback than Jimmy G ever has been. But I think, okay, if you put Tua with a super OP roster, that team can win a title. Like if you put Tua on that Niners team 2 years ago with McCaffrey, Ayuk, Debo, and all those guys in their prime, that team probably wins the title because Tua is just a better quarterback than some of those other guys. But when you put Tua on a team that has fundamental flaws, like this Dolphins team does with their offensive line, with their secondary, with their tight end room, all of a sudden you're handicapped as a team that maybe makes the playoffs, but they'll lose in the wild card, or they just entirely miss the playoffs. And that's my fear with this Dolphins team. Because you have Tua, because you have these severe limitations financially and roster-wise with all the holes they have, this is a team to me that just screams 8 to 11 wins and more than likely either missing the playoffs or being bounced out in the wild card, which to me is arguably the worst position to be at as an NFL roster, because now you're stuck in a situation where you're probably paying players a lot of money because you're still a competent team, like a Miami is with Tua, like a Tyreek and so on and so forth, but you're also not bad enough to where you can get those top picks. You're picking in the 16 to 22 range. And when you're in that range, you're not getting the ultra premier talent of a NFL draft class. When you are a shitty team like the Carolina Panthers or I guess the Cleveland Browns at times, at the bare minimum, you get to take shots on prospects that have a lot of talent. And unfortunately for Miami, they just aren't able to get those same shots. Like, I love Kenneth Grant. I think he's a quality player, but I don't think Kenneth Grant is as good as a Travis Hunter. I don't think he's as good as some of those other super elite top tier talents. I think he's a good player and he'll be a quality role player, but I don't think he has that top 10 player upside in him. And that's kind of the issue with the Dolphins right now. They don't have the money open to spend money to get better. They also don't have the talent on the roster outside of like Tyreek Hill and some guys defensively to really elevate their roster to be a good team. I think they have a quarterback that's very limited. They don't get premier draft capital, and as well as they just sometimes lose out draft capital because of trades and various other things. And I think you look at a Dolphins team that is just severely handicapped in multiple different ways. Again, as I mentioned, don't take this all to heart. I do think Tua and this Dolphins team hopefully can get things going in the right direction in a few years. I just think as we head into 2025, I think the Dolphins will be a mediocre team that for as long as this team kind of continues this train of not making big moves, like cutting some players or getting off some players, they're just going to be consistently kind of stuck in this no man's land, and it's quite unfortunate. But you let me know in the comment section below how many wins will the Dolphins get, and I love you guys. Peace.